The opinions expressed in this program are not those of CISA 7 or Time Warner Cable.
What's your tomorrow?
First motion.
I move that the employment of Ingrid Parker as Family Engagement Coordinator, 12 months, as presented, be approved.
Second.
Effective September 28th, 2015.
Second.
Questions or? Okay, Sandy?
Jeffries?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Wagner?
Aye.
Blackout?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Carried 7-0.
I move that the consent items as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Maloney?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Blackout?
Aye.
Wagner?
Aye.
Jeffries?
Aye.
Carried 7-0. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the special board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have 7 board members present tonight. To my left is Dr. Michelle Langenfeld, our superintendent. We're also joined at the table by multiple members of her cabinet and Sandy Heller, our board assistant. And then we have 2 intercity student council members tonight, Luli Martinez Cruz, who's from East High School and is president of Intercity Student Council, and Caleb Jeffries from West High School. Prior to starting this meeting, we have a public forum, which is an opportunity for members of the community to speak before the board. Is there anyone tonight who would like to speak before the board? Seeing none, then we will move on to our first teaching and learning work session, and I'll turn that over to Katie.
Thank you, Brenda. We have nothing to discuss, and that concludes our work session.
All right, thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
I'm getting a little concerned for the high salary you get if this is twice in
You
a row.
announced that,
Oh, was
I'm
it?
not- you're saying I'm
Don't
not
have
earning my
anything to-
25 cents an hour? Is that what you're saying?
October and November will be busy.
All right.
If there's payback coming.
That's right.
All right, then we will move on to the operations organizational support work session, and I'll turn that over to Chris Wagner.
Thank you. Let me get it up on screen here. Well, the first thing we have, Andy's going to, and Micah will be talking about a facility study.
Good evening. Thank you for having Mike and I this evening. Originally called this a feasibility study, facilities feasibility study, geared towards what can we do. But that's under the impression that we need to do something. I think it's safe that, and we've started graphing some of the information about the 42 sites that we currently occupy, a couple of them rented, many of them aging, wanted to come up with a plan. It's a large venture to get into this, actually have a firm come in, evaluate our facilities from several different aspects, and then be able to help us craft what might be done in order to meet some of those problems that currently exist. As I indicated, it is a large, daunting task. Do we have the capacity to do it internally? Quite possibly. Under a fairly tight timeline, I don't believe we do. Safe to say, Mike? Okay. So in front of you, you should have had an opportunity to review an RFP for facilities master plan study, where we would be inviting firms to come in, analyze our facilities, literally take a look at them, take some information that we already currently have that exists right now, mesh that in with some of our enrollments, both historically, current, and reaching out to the future, and being able to come up with something that will help us both instructionally, financially, again, several different aspects. Okay. That's why we're in front of you tonight, give you an opportunity to be able to take a look at that, see the document that we're going to be sending out publicly to several firms. Just so you're aware, and I believe a couple of you you should be aware, we did already interview 3 firms. We used that as a request for information. We've regressed a little bit, and then we've recharted our course to this document that you have in front of you.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Okay, well, I'm just going to go over a couple items that are factors that have led up to the request to do this study. So over the last several years, we've been having a continuing increase in enrollment. Some years it's been a few hundred, others it's been more than that. So we continue to get an increase in enrollment throughout the district. Also, our population of students and families have been becoming more mobile, which can be a significant increase in enrollment at some of our schools, not only from year to year, but sometimes within the school year because families move quite frequently. We've also been aware of some residential developments that are going to that possibly could take place on the east side. There's a large development that's just south of our high school site, which is just north of Fravel, north of Finger Road, that we've been made aware of. And then talking to a couple of developers, there's a couple other areas that they're looking at possible developments. We don't have time frames for these, but they are on our radar. Also, our growing list of deferred maintenance. Every year our list keeps growing. We have one of the areas that keeps growing faster than we can keep up is our roofs and parking lots. So we have to continue to look at our deferred maintenance. And then the instructional delivery and how that has changed from when a lot of our buildings were designed and how that impacts our facilities, along with changing in technology, which is an ongoing item. And then the demographics of our students has been changing throughout the years, so we need to look at that and take that into consideration when we're doing our facilities. And then added programs that we've been doing throughout the years. Several years ago we started 4-year-old kindergarten. We're doing some customized education with the welding program, Baylink Manufacturing, starting this year up the automotive shop at East, and others that may come up. So we need to start looking at those and how those impact our facilities. And then equity within our schools. There's several schools that we've put a lot of work into these last couple of years, but there's other schools that haven't had that same work done to them. So we need to look at and getting equitable facilities throughout our district. And then leasing. We're still presently leasing space at St. Peter and Paul and St. Philip's, and we need to look at, is that the way we want to continue, or do we want to go another path in lieu of leasing the buildings? So those are some of the items that we've been discussing and are factors that are leading up trying to do a master plan on not only what will need to take place in the next year or two, but out 5-10 years. So historically, we've done our projections. We do those on an annual basis. We do our room utilizations. We have a lot of data, which we feel will be a great foundation for this report, and that we would be working closely with whichever consultant that we would hire to provide this information, and then let that be the foundation for the report.
Thank you. So on page 1, we've identified 10 bullets, and literally, I originally they were bullets. I've now numbered them, and there's a purpose behind that. On page 2, we've identified 4 priorities, and I have to admit they're not necessarily in any rated area, but they are 4 priorities. So the 4th one is probably just as important as the first or second one. First priority that we have, and the reason that I threw numbers on page 1 is that way we can say priority number 1, it's related to those indicators 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I've tried grouping those prior ones just so you could see logical sense as they come through. Assessment of current instructional space resulting in solutions to meet future instructional and programmatic needs. What does that mean? We're educating students a little bit differently. Our facilities are aging. We'd like to just understand that a little bit more. Okay, that's the purpose behind that, and again, it addresses the first 4 bullets on the previous page. Any questions? as of yet? Okay, good. Second, as Mike indicated, equitability of offerings to all students. What does equitability mean? I think that's one of the first things that we need to define. Does it mean the same thing across all kindergarten through 8th grade at all 4 of our high schools? I think we need to determine that, because accessibility might lead to some divergences and whatnot, that we need to make sure that students do have equitable offerings, equitable spaces to them.
Let me go back on that one, if I may.
Please.
Help me out. Is there something that's striking you right now that isn't equitable among our schools? And Andy, I know you haven't been here long, so I guess I'm looking at the other folks for that question.
Yeah, I think so. I think that as we look from school to school, you know, we're every time we do something new, we recognize that we have an opportunity to create that space, the educational environment, to look more like how we're teaching. So when I think of an instructional space that was built for desks, for example, right now when we go and we try to put tables in or group work, it can be, the space may not be conducive even with the layout to group work versus individual desks and rows. That's just one example you can see when you go from school to school. So it's really how teachers are teaching and what that environmental space needs to look like to be the most conducive to the learning of the students.
I mean, don't we still have schools that don't have separate gyms and cafeterias?
Right, we still have some of that.
So that's fairly basic.
Gymnasiums.
Gymnasium?
Cafetorium.
That sounds terrible.
We have
So.
schools that, you know, the music room is less than
That's right,
ideal. And
that's right, yeah.
or they're teaching in the cafeteria
Yes.
and have to, you know, various things like that.
And don't we still have schools where especially the primary classrooms are too small?
Well, that's what I'm,
Without
yeah,
sinks.
that's
Yeah.
what I'm, and without sinks and
Yeah.
some of those pieces. So
Yeah.
I think the district has done a really nice job as we've passed referendum to upgrade to
Upgrade,
make it more
definitely.
21st century, moving into 22nd. But there's still plenty of opportunity because I don't know what's the age of some of our older buildings.
100 years.
Yeah, there's some that are from
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
early 1900s.
So there's opportunity there.
And we do have some of that.
history too. All buildings have AC now, Mike.
History.
Pardon me?
All the buildings have AC, air conditioning now?
No, there's still going to be, we have Frable that does not have air conditioning, Webster that does not, about 3/4 of Aldo Leopold does not. I think those are the 3 that I can think of right now.
On the schools that we started but aren't air conditioned yet.
Right.
Those,
Fort Howard,
process.
Edison, or Franklin and Washington.
but those will be
Yeah.
at the end of next summer.
Yep.
by
Vinci?
next summer.
Well, now that's
Da Vinci is-
that's a renovation.
Right.
Yes.
Actually, that's more than a renovation. It's
Yeah.
almost a gut redo, so. Okay.
Third priority that we've identified is a site analysis of Baird Elementary. So I guess Dr. Wagner do it. That's probably one of those that in particular, it's big enough that it made its own list. It made it onto the list. So it was an open concept that was probably too small to begin with, literally. Open concept is bigger space. So taking a look at that site, it's been identified in the past and we need to finally do something about that. So again, rather presumptuous to say something's wrong with it, something is wrong with it. Let's have a look at it and see what we can come up with. I hope you'd all agree in that sense, if you've been there.
Yes.
And it was a discussion, just, you weren't here, but the
Oh,
board
sure.
had that discussion
Good.
with the referendum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fourth one, and again, as Mike indicated, we do have 2 spaces that are leased in their newer programs and their somewhat volatile programs. So what does the future of leasing look like? Are there some solutions that we might be able to find in district? If there ends up being spaces open up as we've seen some migration, movement internally, is some spaces available and whatnot. So we'd like to have a look at that, again, from an outside perspective, from a firm that we can hire lawyer that can look at it from a much more analytical, unemotional standpoint than we potentially can look at.
If I may, as an admonishment, something that the district did several years ago, which bothered me and does to this day, it's been corrected. We had space at Keller, and we were running out of space at Nicolay for Head Start. So a lot of the Head Start was moved to Keller, which was just, the people around St. Peter and Paul. And finally, the opportunity arose to rent from St. Peter and Paul, and now we have Head Start in a neighborhood where the kids are, rather than expecting them to get out to Keller. So I hope things like that are weighed and taken into account.
Yeah.
Just because you have room someplace doesn't mean it's the best.
Yeah, understandable. Thank you. If you do have any suggestions, if you've had an opportunity to review this document, please get them to Mike or I as soon as possible. If there's anything in there, not just the little misspellings or a comma in the wrong spot, but anything substantial. It is our intent to get this out as soon as possible. We would like to make this a priority. It's our intent to get it out literally tomorrow if we can, with the goal of getting this back to you for recommendation at one of the October board meetings.
That seems awfully ambitious. Mr. Becker?
I guess I'd be interested in a little bit more discussion about why we need an outside firm to do this. Just saying that we might have some, foreknowledge, creating an emotional attachment to some of this doesn't. We have high-level professionals that should, be able to see past that. So before we go spending a lot of money on a third party, we've done this in-house before. We've continued to hire qualified people into those positions. So why is it so important to take this outside?
Sure. I'd only be guessing at the number of man hours that it would take to complete a full study that an outside firm would be completing in a very short window. I would only be guessing.
Yeah. If I could offer, when we started having a conversation about when we started talking about if we could manage this at capacity inside, outside, a couple of variables to keep in mind. Our enrollment is shifting, shuffling, moving. And one of the things when we even before going to any RFP or anything, we did a request for information, and that's what Andrew referenced earlier, to see if there is expertise and experience that we don't have, and in addition to capacity. And one of the things that was very apparent to me was the ability to a lot of experience in engaging the community and gathering input. And we're talking extensive community input, extensive bringing people across a large district on board. That was one area that appeared very apparent to me. Another really focused in around the creative things that they had things I've never seen that look like interesting ideas that could be very cost effective and efficient. I think it's La Crosse School District. They did a community school where they actually hub all the resources, but they combined a number of elementaries, I believe is what they ended up doing, to create this center in the urban part, I'm assuming, of the community, really bringing in and leveraging a true community school with all the resources central. We saw opportunity to retool 100-year-old schools to create environmental spaces that we've never seen before. I think that to do this well and right, we don't know what we don't know. That would be one thing. And if we are going to take the amount of resource that I believe it will require and do it well and right, then there are people who can't do anything else in the organization. That's how big this looks to us. We have 40, how many schools?
42.
42. And when you start to look at what they do, they talk to community, they talk to staff, they talk to students, they talk to everyone who's a stakeholder to get a sense of how it would work for you and what's working, what's not. And I think that would be a much more comprehensive look than just, if we were just doing a little bit. Then we also have this whole thing around enrollment. And how do you tier a system? Can you create a system of tiering? What happens if the district increases? We can't project some of this right now because of where we are enrollment-wise. What happens if the district decreases? I looked at data today. We have 3,000 kids moving in the course of a school year. That in and of itself is creating some things. So that's why we've looked at it. I think it's far bigger than us. That's our sense.
I like the fact that we state in here that we can reject any and all returns, because I think that's important.
Yes.
I think it's important to look
Yeah.
at what these firms are offering, and if we don't think they're offering what we want, we can say no, thank you.
Right.
I guess as long as we're going to do this, I want to make sure that we're casting a broad enough net and getting the firms that do this. Have we checked with the 3 state organizations that represent this school district, WASBO, which is the school business officials, WASDA, which is the administrators, and WASB, because I think they may have knowledge on firms that have done this elsewhere?
Yep. I've been a part of this twice, so this would be my third go around.
Okay.
And I've been through the full process and the RFP, actually soliciting. One of my later points is we need a firm that's going to be big enough, quick enough to be able to get the job done in a timely fashion, in an effective to meet our needs, which I'm thankful for your point. The last component of this that is really my final point is we need to evaluate them in a matrix that allows for a decision to be made that we can stand upon. And so as I look at WASBO, WASDA, and WASB, I know that there's going to be 11 firms that will probably submit responses from a little tiny place down in Janesville all the way to Summersville here in Green Bay, and then the 3 firms that we've already interviewed, I guess, and solicited some of that information. So there's probably going to be anywhere from 9 to 11, 12, 13 firms. I don't think many won't take a look at this.
Well, I think it's important, and I think, Andrew, you know this, to get a firm that's done large urban school districts. We don't want someone that's done a suburban or a small rural district someplace that they don't understand the scope of what this school district is. And I think the part of it that's really critical to me is the community engagement. And I would certainly hope that the RFPs would get into that extensively and how we are going to engage the community. And also I like the part in involving the board, because we're the elected representatives of the school district, and I think it's critical that the board is involved. Just a couple of, maybe I'm jumping around here. I don't know, Chris, you want me to go ahead?
Thank you.
There are a couple things. One of the things that I think and I think we have to be careful on how we approach it. We refer to possible school closures. I think that'll make the community nervous. I think we have to make it very specific that we don't have anything in mind, but that we have to keep that on the table. And then it doesn't mention, which I think we need to do, is possible boundary changes. And that's another thing that communities don't like. I know this school district has done that in the past. And I know that's very painful, but I think if we're going to look at the whole picture, I think you have to look at boundary changes, and that's not specifically mentioned in here.
The initial draft didn't even have the word possible closings, so I have to compliment Patty in my office that she added that.
Yep.
So and I'm not aware of any definite by any means. I don't believe there's been any discussions, so thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, we're a growing school district, and we're not in a position that, some large urbans are declining enrollment, and that's a more immediate need. I think we're looking more at building than closing, but I still think that's got to be on the table.
Sure. And that engagement is an important piece, especially when it comes to something like a selection, let alone those boundary changes and what that all entails, and bringing people to the table to help understand and be a part of that process.
Because engagement is a tough thing. You know, every year we say, well, we hope people come to the budget hearing and tell us what they think about our school district. And then we have the hearing, and there might be somebody from the Taxpayers Association who says we're spending too much money, and that's all we hear. So I think we really need to reach out to targeted groups to make sure we just don't say, all right, we're going to have a public hearing, and then if nobody shows up, well, I guess they're not interested. I think we need to do much more than that. That's a thing.
They show up when referendum's there, so
Right.
we need to get them in before then.
Absolutely.
You know. Yes,
What kind of, with the understanding, of course, we still are gonna want firms to bid competitively, what is a typical fee for a project like this?
Yeah, that's, as I try to anticipate questions that you guys might ask, I have no idea. Some firms will come in very aggressive because that they believe that's going to be a foot in the door if we end up doing something, a referendum, some construction or whatnot. Some reputable firms will probably, in both ways here, some firms will just be straight up and literally try to build down to the cost of their engineer at $180 an hour. So I know that there's going to be a huge divergence, high and a low between all firms that solicit. We're going to need to make an informed decision based on what we're going to be able to get as a return.
But you've done a couple, you said you've done a couple of these before?
I have, and so the first time I went through it was for an 11 building district, and prices ranged from $5,500 to $65,000.
Okay.
And we went with a firm that was $10,000. So.
What about the other ones?
And now, granted, this was 4 or 5 years ago. The architectural firms, I'll just say firms in general, they were operating pretty lean, and a lot of them were using these facilities and feasibility studies to keep the doors open, even though they've been around for 80, 100 years. Times are a little bit different. So the 3 firms that we brought in for interviews and information, they're all pretty busy, and that was my one concern right off the bat is, are they going to be too busy for us? I've been reassured by all 3 that they do have time and capacity to be able to do this in a timely fashion. So I'm excited about it. You had a follow-up question.
What about the other district? You said you did this twice.
Yeah, it was my previous district. It was a single building, and oddly enough, it was a 1-building district, and it was around $10,000. So same price as that 11 building district.
Okay, so we would anticipate probably everything being 5 figures and maybe some being 6, because we're.
I think that's safe. Yeah.
And I appreciate that, and a question answered with a wide range of numbers, right? Could either be a cop out, or it's really going to be that broad of a range, and that's what you've seen, and that's what we get. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
If I could,
go ahead.
I saw another hand down here. Okay. I just wanted to add to what Mike said earlier too. One of the things that we anticipate that will be cost savings is when Mike has a very good sense of all of how our boilers are, all of these pieces, and often that's part of what they look at and look for. But we can provide some very foundational pieces about our actual structures. I would offer that I believe facilities has a very good understanding of what's currently there.
So they're not duplicating what we already have.
They wouldn't have to
Right.
duplicate, and that would be a cost savings in this process. And time, cost not only in dollars, but time as well, I would think. Instead, because sometimes you look at these proposals and they go from building to building, just looking at in the boiler rooms, so I think that there's opportunity there to cut some costs.
Thank you. Speaking of time, can you project how much time this might take?
I think it's going to take several months.
Okay. But we'd be able to get it done within 1 school year?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, that would be the goal.
Okay.
The goal would be try to have it done for next spring, so if we need to take some action, we could, do something after next spring.
Can you tell me what the assessment of current instructional space how that might roll out, what that might look like. I think that's really intriguing to me.
Sure. So as we have a typical classroom right now, it might be a 950 square foot classroom at Baird, which is actually probably a pretty big classroom for Baird. Forgive my humor. What would it look like in an optimal situation? So as we have, and again, based on boundaries, if they end up moving and whatnot, but the population of Baird, and drilled down not just the school, but all the way down to the classroom, what does that look like? So as teachers are instructing, and maybe you guys might help as well, but
We'll help you.
yeah,
Finish
thank
up.
you. Yeah. As teachers are instructing, what does that look like? It's not the traditional desks in a row anymore. It's having tables and collaborative spaces and smart boards and areas where teachers can differentiate a little bit and meet some individual students' needs with the wider range that we're acknowledging. So some students that might need some remedial versus some of the gifted and talented students.
So what would, I mean, the consultants who would come in, how would they approach that? I mean, work with Mark's department and
That's
into the schools themselves, talking to about what's going on in terms of instructional delivery and such.
what's it going to take for you to deliver on your curriculum, and what have you seen as opportunities for you to really, deliver this, and what things are missing from your current environment. I mean, we got to sneak into a little bit about what they would do, but like that collaborative space, or is there breakout rooms, or from an equipment standpoint, are they portable, and are you able to move things versus these desks or tables that you gotta physically lug around before and after school.
So it's going to be a lot more involved than just saying you have to have 27 square feet per student, something like that.
They will literally get into the classrooms and talk to the teachers and talk to the principals, and it's a pretty thorough process. One of the other pieces, and I talk about this, what experiences do they have? And a lot of this decision, it's not based on the cost, even though there is going to be that wide range. One of the important things is, what have you done lately? And not just what have you done, but what have you done in schools, and what can you show us? They're not recreating the wheel. They might make a school look a little bit different from Middleton to La Crosse, but the foundational pieces are still there that you can see that will bring that into meeting our needs for current instruction delivery.
I think if we could use, it's similar to me of what we've done at Da Vinci and at Minoka. When we redid those spaces, we had a lot of conversations around what's the optimal learning environment, what allows our teachers to collaborate, whether it's, doors in between the rooms where you can open things up for large space and small space, whether it's the technology, the height of the tables, what are we writing on the boards with? I mean, we did a lot of that through both of those buildings, and I think those are the discussions that you have, and Tammy was a big part of that at Da Vinci in particular. And then we visited other schools. We actually went to the technical school to see their learning spaces.
Thank you. I'd be very interested too to see what, with that second priority, which I really appreciate, equity of offerings, and just how that rolls out in terms of not just the specialized programs, but the programs for kids with disabilities, that sort of thing, that we're providing more than just equity, what they really need.
When we have these conversations with our student services department, do we get to have some input? Because they know too what's the optimal learning environment for special education and some of those pieces, and those are all part of the conversations. Those people get to come in and share, which I think is great.
Thank you.
Can you, so we have the RFPs come in from however many send in. What, it wasn't completely clear to me what the process from there is in terms of who's involved in the initial screening and selection, and in particular, what role will the board play? Will it be the entire board, or a couple of us, or how will that work?
Sure. What I'd like to do is throw all the information into a matrix. By the time you would start to see some stuff, and it can be brought forward to you at any point, it'd be the firm, the cost. We'd start conducting references, but we'd put a matrix together, and then based on that, I think we would try to develop a list that we'd like to bring in for an interview. I think at that point, we would probably involve a couple of you. I don't know if all of you would like to be involved. Some of you might just say that it's not in my wheelhouse, I don't care about that, but more than happy, if we get a quorum, we just have to post for it. So I wouldn't have a problem, but I'd probably like Michelle to be involved and a couple of the instructional folks, and we'll let Mike participate too. So, but I think it'd be a core group to help understand and then conduct those interviews. It's not going to be, we're not going to be able to select a firm without doing those interviews. That's just not possible. So we'd have to pencil in, and I'm guessing that we'd probably bring in 3-4 firms to take a look at and see what they have to offer and have an opportunity to meet the actual folks who would be on the job. That's an important piece.
From my experience, when we get the request for proposals back, they're not going to be black and white. They're going to be all over the range. And I think there's going to be a lot of follow-up with the firms to see exactly what services they're going to be providing, because, as Andrew said, we're going to get some that are on the low range of $5,000–$10,000, and some that might be over $100,000, and they're not going to be providing the same services for those amounts, and we really need to do a lot of investigating on what the differences are before we bring anything up.
So when you said bringing something to the board at our next work session, what point of this process that you've described were you referring to?
The end process, I would really like to bring something to you for approval to get them started that next Tuesday at the October 19th meeting. I'm hoping that's possible. We've developed a timetable here that we literally get this out. We get it back by I think it's Tuesday the 6th, October 6th. Gives us a couple weeks then to conduct those interviews, reference checks, and everything kind of buttoned up and brought forward.
So you'd be bringing the selected firm to the 19th
Correct.
board meeting? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So
I'm
there's
clear.
a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe, it goes back to one of the things as we talked, because of timeline, if we're going to do something, we, to address the issue by 16, 17, we have to have something planned in the spring of 16. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Am I saying that accurately? And so that's why there's a fast track on this. And again, that doesn't mean the whole plan would be done, but I don't, just as with the referendum, the board made the decision to kind of have different phases of their, so
Sure.
also, one of the things that we would want this plan to do is address the needs now, immediate, 5, 10, how that would look. And provide flexibility in the plan.
A couple more comments, if I may. Maybe there'll be more here also from my colleagues. Baird's a very good example of why you shouldn't follow fads. I would hope when we go through this process, we don't. Open concept was a fad, and it was built to that end. It's been a mess ever since. I mean, and I think either Kim or Mark alluded to having flexible space. Obviously, that's very much of a must in my particular mind. I appreciate your offer to have someone on that interview team, and I would offer myself, but your timeline is such that I'm not going to be here. I hope one of my colleagues can be there for that. In the process, too, we deal with, I believe, help me out, folks, 5 municipalities plus the county.
I think it's 7.
6, 7.
7, Laurie, isn't it?
Alloy, Bellevue,
7
Scott, Humboldt.
No, Humboldt, I forgot
City
about.
of Green Bay.
City of Green Bay.
Town of Green
Bellevue,
Bay.
What?
well, the point being, I think
I think it's
whoever
7.
does this study or part of it, we need to talk to either the powers that be or the professionals in those community when it comes to community planning.
Sure.
To make sure they're included in this process, not as an afterthought. I think that's very important.
Good point.
Yes.
To your previous point, what is your planned week or timeline for conducting interviews? Because then I was going to have, based on availability of board, if we know kind of a week, like, you said you already know you're probably not available, then I'd just have whoever's interested in being part of that interview committee let me know.
Okay.
And then if we just have 3, we'll go with that. If we
Okay.
have more than that, we'll decide if we want to post or
Okay to be in touch with that then shortly?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, let me know. Well, why don't you email the board and say, here's, kind of this rough window of when we would be interviewing. And then once you get that, then board members can just send me an email if you're interested in being on that interviewing panel.
Okay.
Okay,
And-
thank you.
If I could just, while I'm thinking about it, if, as we create the RFP if we know the week,
Mhm.
I would offer that we should probably include that in the RFP.
Sure.
It says that this is the week we anticipate interviewing, so that they can have that in their heads too. If selected to be interviewed, that's when we're gonna do it, so,
Thank you.
thank you.
It's been a couple days since I read through this document, but there was something about once things get going, there'll be a panel. And what was the panel about again? Help my
Yep.
memory.
That is the panel that we're referencing.
One here,
The
I'm sorry,
interviewing.
The interview
Yeah,
panel.
yep,
this selection.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interview, yep.
yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that all? Well, thank you. Appreciate what you're doing with this. Yeah, it's quite a bit there, and it's going to probably be more political than we all care to admit as we go down the road here, but so be it.
Thank you.
Do you need us to, no, you good?
Nope.
All right.
I'm just gonna stay seated.
Okay,
So-
sounds good.
She likes this spot. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Now we have tax advantage obligation policy.
Yeah, this is something, and I think each of the last several debt issues that I've been a part of, Quarles and Brady, who's legal counsel for a lot of Baird's debt issue, which we use Baird for debt issues, has said, Andy, have you gotten that management of tax exempt and tax advantaged obligations policy and rule done yet? I thought, no, I haven't. Excuse me, so
They didn't know
I
you
thought-
just started, right?
they didn't, but this was in previous, they've been pushing it here for about 2 or 3 years. So I thought, we just went through the process. Allison from Quarles said, Andy, get it up there. And I said, sure, I'll do it. And so this is a little bit of a warm up, I think, to the next policies that we'll be bringing forward over the next few months. So 2 points behind the policy 631.1. Number one, it allows districts to be a little bit more informed in the process. Right now, I say, hey, Mike at Baird, get this done for us, and he gets it done. And we need a few things signed, and we need to get a few things brought forward to you. And but it's a process that's pretty automated. This allows a little bit more interaction, and it makes sure that we follow that process. Okay. The second thing is that it makes sure that Baird might not overstep their boundaries. Separation of duties is a term that's commonly used in accounting and whatnot. It means that I can't collect the money, count the money, take the money to the bank, and reconcile the checking account. Okay, that's what this is doing, is that it ensures that that doesn't happen, that Baird doesn't sell the debt and buy the debt and some of those other associated things, that they're stepping on their own toes. The IRS loves this. That's why Quarles and Brady, the legal counsel for all these debt issues, is recommending it. So we're bringing it forward for those 2 considerations. Are there any questions? No, it's boring stuff, I'm sorry, but
So,
We just minorly glazed over. Someone's gonna steal from you, that's
Well-
not boring at all.
are you really gonna ask a question,
It's
Brenda?
interesting what you say about buying
Yes.
and
Please,
selling.
please.
very minor question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I understand who these people are in this.
Yes,
There's the compliance officer, that's you.
yeah,
And then the utility business manager, that's you too?
yeah.
Okay. Then you're coordinating with each other. I'm looking at what am I looking at? The rule,
Yep.
the very first 1A. Compliance officer will coordinate with the utility business manager with respect to monitoring post-issuance compliance.
Oh, I'll have to check and see, the utility business manager, that might end up being somebody like an Angela, like a finance director. It would be,
Okay.
it would be 2 different positions.
So then in here, who is the Baird equivalent person identified in here? Because I only found those 2 people. I didn't know who they were.
They would not be, this is all internal.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
This is the internal.
This is
Yep.
our own internal.
This is our own internal process. Yep. it doesn't speak about what we do outside of it. It's all internal, that we end up coordinating the different components of it.
Okay, so what
Yep.
we do internally then is what we coordinate with
Yes.
when we're working with them?
Yep.
Okay.
And I can find out who that utility business manager is just for peace of mind. So I'd
Okay.
be more than happy to. I'd like to know myself. I apologize, I don't.
Any other questions? I did have one, and I'm sorry I didn't write down where it was in this area here. It talked about naming rights, and I didn't follow how that fit into this tax exempt conversation.
Might that be in, is it, you remember it was in this policy?
I remember seeing it too. It's
I
under
did too.
private activity
Activity
concerns, number
concerns,
4,
yeah.
right out at the bottom, 4.9. Or 4E9,
4E.
sorry. Yeah.
Ooh,
It's a very, well, it's not the last thing, so.
yeah, again, I think that goes to some of the conflict of interest and whatnot, so.
Goes to what, I'm sorry?
Conflict of interest type things, so naming rights and, boy, I
So
can't
in
even.
other words, so Baird should not be able to sell our bonds for us and then request that we name a football field after them? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Because we do
It's-
have
it's-
a naming.
I can't.
Yeah, we have
policy.
a separate policy.
Separate
Yeah.
policy,
Yeah.
okay, that's
Yeah.
why I couldn't.
So does it have to, so does that naming rights policy have to refer to ours?
Yes, and I think I believe it, I don't know if it references it or not.
I don't-
To cross-reference?
Yeah.
This is the rule, so.
Oh,
this
that's
is
the
in
rule, yes, yeah.
Okay, but should it be in the policy? Or is it not in there?
Cross-reference. We can cross-reference.
Yeah, cross-reference it. Good
I
call.
have to admit, I now had empathy with Sandy and Linda when I asked them to read my documents, when I started reading this policy, because this was not in my wheelhouse. So I'm very thankful for Andy's guidance and
Sure.
help on this policy.
Foreign language?
It was a foreign language.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was,
So we can move that policy on to the board meeting then? for approval?
yes.
And the next item has to do with grants from private sources.
Yeah. I need to go to my notes. Again, 2 bullets under this policy. As it stands right now, there's just not a whole lot of structure associated with this policy. The purpose behind it is to have a little bit of better overall awareness by our stakeholders, those individuals, both internal as well as external, as we were soliciting grants and whatnot, private donations and everything. The second point behind this is it creates an alignment between our mission, our vision, our strategic roadmap. It allows us to determine whether or not we should or should not accept funds, be pursuing such monies. I see that those are the 2 points behind this policy.
Yes.
So under, how, I guess my question, if you need more explanation, I'll give you that too, but how will we communicate this to people that potentially would put in a grant wanting to use our site, our school, and don't know that this policy exists?
Yeah, we've created internal documents that have been shared that help create some of the foundation and the structure behind this that people should be aware of.
And this is Kim Shannock's office. So Kim is working with our external partners to provide that process. As she's reaching out to the community and is now in the community, people are aware of her position. They're aware of that we have a process now for grants, and so we're not getting them at the end where we have a lot of people who do a lot of great things for us, but when when other entities are writing grants and it involves that we hire staff and a number of things that are incompatible with our policies and procedures, that's where we thought we have to have some tights around this, and we reached out to larger school districts to see what they do with respect to internal and external grants. Some really large school districts have entire grant departments that manage all of this, and their policies are much more extensive and cumbersome. So this is our first attempt to try and get some parameters around both internal and external as to what that looks like. We've done some work internally with the crowdfunding sources such as GoFundMe and Donors Choose, that we've worked with our staff a little bit, working with Diane's department. We have a lot of great staff who want to have a lot of great things in our classrooms, but we got to have the technology support for those things, for, you know, iPads and devices, and making sure they're compatible, and when they bring them on board, what does that look like for support from our staff as well. So this is our first attempt, where it's a, you know, good thing about policies is they're not set in stone, that we can come back and tweak them as we work through the process. But Kim has developed a number of documents that are really nice flow charts that will be used with our external and our
So they
internal
can see the
partners.
flow.
Okay.
It's not that we've seen any problems, major problems to date, though, is that we're just trying to clean it up? Is that what I'm hearing?
I don't want to call them problems, because it's always people who are really well-intended
Well-intentioned.
and doing some great things
Concerns,
for
I
our
guess,
kids.
would be better.
But there have been some concerns, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, you know, there's a road and it's paved.
My mother used to say all the
Most of my
time.
friends are probably going there, so I don't have a problem with that. Any event, anything else on that? We'll move this on to the board. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Human Resources, benefit proposal,
Yes,
pharmacy benefit.
pharmacy benefit recommendation. This recommendation was brought to the board in August at the work session meeting. And from that meeting, a number of questions were generated, and our consultant with the National Cooperative provided the responses to the 12 questions. Briefly, just to review, the pharmacy recommendation is to require our employees and their families to choose a generic medication over a brand medication when there is at least 3 generic equivalents available on the market that they could choose from. And if they would choose to take the brand medication, they would pay the cost difference between the medication, between the cost of the generic and the brand medication, plus the brand copay. And as you remember, the brand copays are higher than the generic copays. Just to highlight some of the, I won't go through each and every one of the questions, but I think one of the things that I recall was a concern was how long would a review process take? And our consultant said that it would take up to 72 hours if they had all the relevant information, so basically 3 days. During that time, if the person needed the medication, they could choose the generic medication, or they could choose the brand, but they would pay the higher cost of the brand if they chose that brand medication at that time. Another question that came up is about the step therapy process. How many of the people went through the step therapy process? And according to the consultant, about 25 of the 129 insured people who are on brand medications now went through the step therapy process. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that those people would be granted the brand, because since then, there may be 3 equivalent generic medications on the market, and they would then not be grandfathered into the brand. They would be required to go through and choose a generic if it was available. Much has changed, and some of these people may have been on their brand medications for a very long time. A question came up about, does National Cooperative RX make any money from the decision? And the answer is no. They don't have any financial incentive to recommend this. And in fact, there may be additional costs because of the appeals to them. That was question 11. Those are some of the highlights that were brought forward. Are there any other questions that you might have? Because we do have this next week before the board meeting to try to clarify anything else that you would need before Monday.
Mr. Becker?
Personally, I appreciate the answers. They came quickly to board members and were, I think, comprehensive. I still have a couple of concerns. First of all, the easier one perhaps, because I don't think I was alone on this, the idea of the plan actually paying less if you choose the brand, and actually penalizing you versus a structure where if you're going to take the brand, the plan should pay the same amount. It shouldn't pay $40 less than the same amount. So I would hope we would take that out if we proceeded. Is that in the?
Well, that, I remember that was this graph where if the employee or their family member chose the brand, when you look at the amount paid by the plan, it could be less than if they chose the generic. And the consultant said that that's part of the incentive to have the individual pay the higher copay and choose the generic, not to make that even. And we would then, the plan, we as a district would save money. It's to incent people to go to the generic. I think that was referred to, hopefully it was referred to in,
Yeah, I think you're getting, I think you're being excessively penalized there. You're already going to probably pay a couple $100 more. Do we have to hit you for another 40 on top of it? And I think that's too much. I guess insult to injury, I think.
So they would, is that something you all want to see changed in this?
Well, I'd like to see a change. I mean, the bigger differential is going to be the cost of generic versus cost of brand, not the $40 that's tacked on top of that.
Because it may require the consultant to change how they manage this plan. I could check if we were to do that, if there would be additional cost to the district, because you're changing how they run their business and how they're recommending. But I do see what you're saying, and they responded that this is part of the way they structure the incentive to choose the generic.
And then I guess the other thing I'd like to suggest that we take a look at is I'm still concerned about those, and we talk about the person may. It's nice to say the person may choose the brand, but that's not necessarily true that an hourly employee can reasonably choose the brand if it's going to be $500, when the doctor may have had a very good reason for dispense as written. And in fact, they usually do. If 80+% of appeals are granted, then it means it usually is determined that the doctor determined that the plan agreed that the doctor had a good reason for dispense as written. So where my biggest concern lies then is with that initial prescription fill, where it could be an emergency case, and there doesn't, other than, I think that it was either impossible to reimburse for that, or we could, but it would be after the fact.
I think that if they took if they took the brand and chose that when they could have chosen the generic, we are not going to go back and reimburse them the difference if the appeal was upheld.
But so even if they're successful on appeal, they would still lose that.
For those medications, I would assume that they wouldn't get a full, month supply. They would get something to tide them over.
Well,
the incentive would be for them to take the generic and try that first, if it was a new prescription, and then appeal to take the brand.
And you said it was 72 hours on appeal?
That's what the Wisconsin or the National Cooperative RX said. If they have all the relevant information. So if they don't have everything they need to make the decision, then it could take longer. And it's really going to come down to, I think, the physician's notes.
So
and it's they indicated that 87% of the time the appeal is upheld. So
right, which also suggests that we're hitting the person really hard for going with a dispense as written from the doctor, nailing them for several $100s when 87% of the time the dispense is written is going to be approved, and then saying that even though there's an 87% chance the dispense is written will be approved, you're still out that first month for following your doctor's advice to go with the dispense as written. So a different thought that I had about this is, could that differential be waived for the first fill of the prescription only if the doctor did a dispense as written, and then there would clearly be enough time to go through the appeal process in the meantime?
I could check on that.
Because that would be the first fill of a prescription is a very small part of that overall cost to the district. It's, you know, it would be the ongoing. I could, if it was waived for the individual's first fill of a particular prescription, then I could probably vote yes on this proposal. But otherwise, I can't be in a position of voting yes on something that makes the doctor's recommendation cost prohibitive for the patient, even though it will probably be upheld on appeal, and you still can't even get it back. So that's where I'm at on that.
Just as a follow-up on that, the cost differential that you're talking about, are you talking about just that $40 cost differential?
No, the $40 cost
of the drug.
I'm talking about the cost of the drug.
Yeah. And is there a
If it's just-
willingness on CVS's part to issue like a 1 week or 2 week?
A couple of pills.
Just a week's worth to get them
get the
through the
bridge.
appeal process, so
Yeah.
that if it's upheld, then
I think most of the time, when the prescription comes in for a brand, the pharmacist will say, there is the generic equivalent, would you like that? And most people will say, yes, I'll try that, if it's a new med. I think when it comes down to it, when the doctor writes the prescription and tells the patient, you must have the brand name, and then the person goes to the pharmacy and the pharmacist says, your plan requires you to take the generic because 3 or more are available, that's when the patient is probably going to want to say, you know, my doctor told me I need the brand. That probably won't happen all that often, I would think.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I mean, a lot of times when physicians make the decision to dispense as written, it's because the patient has failed. There's a reason why they're not doing well on generic. And so then, then the doctor starts trying different medications to try to see what's going to work. But to blanket say you have to take the brand name drug would be a pretty rare event. So in other words, if they're, they're not doing well on generic, then they have a window to say, to go back to their doctor, they kind of know it's coming, as opposed to showing up and then having this, on the spot decision making process.
I'm thinking they might even be able to go through the appeal before that time, because the generics, and they would have 3 different wouldn't have worked. And I would think that much of the time it's that there is a GI upset kind of thing going on. And what the pharmacist said is that oftentimes it's a non-compliance issue. If the patient doesn't feel well on the med and they won't take it, then they're not compliant. That's the problem.
or if it's not taken as directed.
If they won't take it because they can't tolerate it, then they have to go to another medication to try to see if they can tolerate it.
So I guess my biggest concern comes to the urgent need prescription that has to be filled right away. The person might be in some serious consequences if they don't take it. And I realize this is a rare situation. Most of these will be non-emergency medications, or will be people with plenty of advance notice and it's a maintenance medication. I get that. But I am worried about the 10 or 5 or 2 or 1 case where it might be a anti-seizure medication with a very tight therapeutic ratio. The doctor has a good reason for doing this, and we don't want the person waiting 72 hours to take the med. The initial fill is cost prohibitive, and really it seems like it could be a reasonable compromise to say you get the first fill at the just a brand copay while you're waiting for things to go through. I don't think that's unreasonable, and I think it's the job of our plan provider to implement the plan that we want, given that we're a large self-insured client.
I will ask if this is something that can be done. Even if it's a smaller number of prescription, maybe a 2 weeks to allow that person to get on it and
just to get them through the appeal process.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that could be, if that's an injectable medication, that 1 week could still be $1,000 to do dispenses written.
Right, right.
Could be.
And again, while we have certain people in the professional ranks for whom that would be merely a hit, it would be impossible for certain people, and I don't. Again, that's my concern. That's not gonna. That can't be on my hands if someone goes away from their doctor's recommendation, because even the 1 week would be $1,000 differential that they can't do when something bad happens. And again, I am saying this with the full understanding that this is a rare case, but we are a big district with many, many, many thousands and thousands of prescription occurrences happening. So if that change were to be made, I'd probably be able to vote yes, but just the 1 week thing, while an improvement, is probably not enough for me. And again, I go back to the fact that if 87% of these appeals are upheld, that suggests that the person doing this for the first time is going to end up back to the brand anyways for a doctor's medical reason.
Any other concerns with it? A couple of things, if I may. 13% on a large district, which you indicated is we are a large district, could amount to a substantial amount of money, in my mind. Another question I would ask, that you ask, Mrs. Marsh, see if I can get this out right. The person has to appeal, and should the appeal be won, instead of having, granted you have to pay for it initially, could it be reimbursed after the fact for the people, again, that challenged it and the challenges of appeal?
So if they
It's a twist to what Mr. Becker's asking. He's asking, why can't they have it be paid for it, right up front? I'm asking, if the challenge is upheld, part of that 87%, could they be reimbursed for that, the amount they paid over?
If they took the generic.
No,
if they
took
the brand, if they took the brand,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, just ask a question. And I'm going to ask my colleagues here, perhaps they know. If you're sitting in a doctor's office and you have something that's basically life-threatening that you need immediate attention for in terms of medication, at least my one experience, does the doctor not have additional medication there to just give it to you to tie you over?
Not always.
Not always.
Not always, okay.
No.
Well, you answered my question.
But if it's life-threatening, chances are you're
gonna be going
ending up
ER.
in ER getting the medication.
Yeah, maybe that's too harsh a term, but I mean, we're talking about medication somebody has to have. How soon do they have to have it? I mean, that's part of Mr.
Yeah.
Becker's concerns. They
Right.
need the medication.
I mean, sometimes they have, I don't know how prevalent.
The samples have dried up
But the
considerably.
samples aren't as.
My dad was always good at weaseling that.
At
out.
weaseling that out.
No, and they have
Come
dried
home
up,
with
they've dried up
baskets.
I
considerably.
think there's
Yeah.
much less of
Yeah.
that that goes on now.
Okay. Is that enough?
Yes, I think I understand the question.
Take 2 aspirins and go to bed.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Dr. Wagner.
So from a technical perspective, how will this work next week then? just from a board action perspective, would it be a motion, or would HR come back with either, you'll talk it over with them and either recommend exactly what this is or recommend changes, and then someone would make that motion and then there'd be amendments, or how would that go?
My thought would be is I would present, there would be a motion for you, and then I would outline the terms, briefly the terms of the plan. It would be, if there would be any changes, they would be noted in an updated memo. So it would be to recommend the generic incentive, I think we call it a generic incentive program. And then as listed in the memo, perhaps, then I would describe the changes to this plan in the memo.
Well, I think part of it would be, in my opinion, after you research this, you're going to be able to come back to that meeting and say, this is what the company says they can or can't do. And then at that point in time, the motion can be made on what the board's comfortable in agreeing to. Is that a fair statement?
Okay. Like, for example, in a question and answer, you ask 2 questions, we'll do the question and answer, and then you would know what.
Or somebody could amend the original motion.
Right.
You know, with the additional information that Jean would provide.
But we're not going to be able to make changes to the plan on the fly next week.
No, because
It'll be either, you might make some changes this week, but it will be voting on what you're recommending, or, voting yea or nay.
what the cooperative said that they can do, what they're recommending
Right.
as a district we do, and how we implement the plan.
But there might be other things the cooperative may come back and say, yes, we could do a first month waiver, but they certainly will say we're not going to recommend it because it won't save you as much money. But then if they say they can do it, then that would be something that could be amended on the floor? Or would it just have to be voted down and then, I mean, if we're talking about outside of the range of what the cooperative says is possible, then it wouldn't be a relevant amendment to make. But what if we're talking about a change within what the cooperative can do?
Something not exactly what you suggested, but something
Well, the cooperative
closer
comes
to it?
back and says, yes, we have the technical capability to do a first month waiver, but we don't think it's a good idea because it saves you less money. And that's the answer. Then I would think we could do, if the administration's recommendation is don't do the first month's waiver, but it is technically possible, then I would think you could do an amendment for that.
Yeah, I think that would work.
Whereas it probably wouldn't be a germane amendment if, at least to accept the proposal of this cooperative for something the cooperative has told us they can't do, in which case you would just have to vote up or down.
We would need I would hope we get a dollar figure on that you save $35,000 less or something, whatever the figure is. I think we would need a figure so we can weigh the the
Although
pluses and minuses.
you won't know how many people would, because the employee still has a choice when they go to the pharmacy if the doctor orders the brand, and they said, well, they might even decide because their copay is $15 less to take the generic.
Right.
Because they've never been on the med before, they might say, I'll try the generic. So you'll never know how many people this would impact.
So we could what we would get is a worst case scenario figure. We could get a figure of every single person who gets the dispenses written takes the brand, even their first time. That would be a worst case scenario.
Well, let's find out what Ms. Marsh finds out for us for next week and go from there. Any other questions, concerns? Committee's completed.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Wagner. And we do have a closed session, so I will read that. Special board meeting closed session has been scheduled for Monday, September 14th, immediately following the adjournment of the work session meetings pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851G, conferring with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved, to wit, potential litigation matters. Pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851F, considering financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons except where paragraph B applies, which if discussed in public would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data or involved in such problems or investigations, to wit, personnel matters. And pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, more specifically to wit, potential contracts. The meeting will begin in open session to consider the appropriate motion for a closed session so provided by law.
So moved.
Second.
Sandy?
Becker?
Aye.
Blackout?
Aye.
Thorpe?
Aye.
Jeffries? Aye. Maloney? Aye. Whitener?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye. Carried 7-0. We will convene across the hall.
What's your tomorrow?